We are counting down to the 2023-24 NHL season, and we begin our previews of our Pacific Division rivals, starting with the San Jose Sharks. Locked On Sharks host J.D. Young joins us to talk Sharks, Kings, and the Pacific Division on this episode of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And of course, we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. This episode of Locked On LA Kings is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter the promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with every order. You won't want to take your Birddogs off, we promise. As I mentioned, we are beginning our Pacific Division rival previews, and our plan is to do one of these each week as we get to the start of the NHL season. And our first team up is our Bay Area rivals. That, of course, is the San Jose Sharks. We're going to look at the Sharks and welcome in the host of Locked On Sharks. His name is J.D. Young, and you can follow him on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it these days, at MyFryHole or at Locked On Sharks. And, of course, you can find Locked On Sharks in all the same places you find Locked On LA Kings, including on YouTube. Hey, JD. Hey, JD, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's been a little while. Yeah, I know we were talking, both enjoying the last bit of our summer until things start to get crazy here again. So, but yeah, it's going to be a long season for the Sharks.
Well, you know, if everybody starts off same record, we'll see how it goes. But it has certainly been an eventful offseason for the Sharks. And I would say that, the biggest trade of the offseason was, of course, involving the Sharks, that 3-team deal with Pittsburgh and Montreal. They ship off the reigning Norris Trophy winner and defenseman Erik Karlsson to Pittsburgh. In exchange, they get 3 NHL players and a first-round pick in next year's draft. I've seen some varying critiques of the draft, both sides, but you follow the Sharks on a daily basis. Your take on the Erik Karlsson trade and how it benefits or does not benefit the San Jose Sharks?
It's fine. Getting the first-round pick is nice. I mean, you're basically trading 4 years of Erik Karlsson's contract to get out of a bad contract in 2 years by acquiring Miguel Granlund. You also got Hoffman and then Jan Ruda. All those guys are meh, to be honest. I think Granlund has maybe the best chance of having an actual impact on the Sharks. But you're buying yourself 2 years earlier of cap space by getting rid of Erik Karlsson. And the nice thing I will say is only having to retain $1.5 million of Karlsson's contract for the next 4 years. So freeing up that $10 million in the future, when the Sharks are hopefully starting to turn the corner, you can be more aggressive in free agency. If you have to start paying some of your stars, whatever you have to do with that money, you have that money freed up. But for the return, though, I mean, you can kind of see, looking at the Brent Burns trade last year, right? They basically got a 3rd-round pick and then a 4th-line forward in Steven Lorentz and then a goalie prospect, right? Nothing kind of super exciting to get about, with it. And I think that was the same thing with Karlsson. It's more about a look to the future of what can you do with this cap space in the future once your books start to get cleaned up, as they've slowly starting to get cleaned up here.
Well, the man that's doing the cleaning is Sharks GM Mike Grier, and he took over at a tough time right before the draft last year. Had to play catch up, I would assume, for a little while, but now he's finally firmly in place. He's had a full season under his belt to kind of get his lay of what the organization is and what they need. It hasn't been long. It's his first time as being a full-time GM, but so far on the job, what do you think of what Mike Grier has done to try and get this team in the right direction?
He has a vision, and that's something the Sharks really haven't had, especially in the last couple of seasons with Doug Wilson, the former GM. And Doug Wilson was trying to win a cup, right? And he was trying to win a cup till the day he left. And Mike Grier realized, you're not winning a cup with this team, and this team is long overdue for a rebuild, and finally embrace that rebuild that the Sharks desperately have needed. So some of his trades I feel like he maybe could have gotten a little bit more with some of the returns, but I really like some of his free agent signings. He's been very aggressive in signing guys to good deals, right? Like none of the contracts are going to blow you away. He signed Matt Benning to a 4-year deal at $1.1 million last year. Matt Benning turned out to be a pretty solid defenseman for the Sharks at a very, very reasonable price. He's been very, very, keeping in mind of trying to get this cap cleaned up and trying to build towards the future, acquiring either soon to be NHL players, and then acquiring draft picks. And there's still plenty of work to be done, but you can see the foundation that he's laying, and you're going to have, especially we'll get into the draft here in a minute. You can see what the foundation of the skill and the size that's coming to San Jose here in the next couple of years.
So Erik Karlsson is gone. Timo Meier was shipped out at the trade deadline last year to New Jersey. You still got some familiar names, Tomas Hertl, Logan Couture. And, when you do a show like this, you have varying degrees of fans who follow the league. Some fans just follow their team, some maybe the team in the Pacific, and some people follow the whole NHL. But for those who haven't been keeping track of what's been going on with the Sharks, who are the important pieces for San Jose for now and in the near future?
William Eklund is kind of the one guy right now. So he was the 2021 first-round pick, taken 7th overall right before Brett Clark. He will be making his full-time NHL debut this year. They kind of were playing the ELC slide game with him last year, kept him in the Barracuda in the AHL all season long, except for 8 games, but then sent him back so that way they can kick the can down on that ELC at least one more season. But he should be, if he's not an opening night guy, he will be playing with the Sharks, I would say, before Thanksgiving, because I think he's just that talented and that special. So he did have shoulder surgery over the summer, got hurt at the end of the last year, kind of shut him down. But from talking to him earlier throughout the summer, feels like he's ready to go. He's ready. He's been kind of chomping at the bit to get out there. So he's going to be the big name for the Sharks. They also did acquire some players. They got Anthony Duclair, who they acquired from the Panthers. I think he's 2 years removed from a 30-goal campaign. Tore his Achilles going into last season, and came back. And of course, coming from Achilles, that can be a little slow for some people. But I think he's going to have every opportunity because the Sharks just don't have a ton of talented players in their top 6, and I think he's going to kind of help fill that Timo Meier role at 5-on-5 and on the power play. He's on his last year of his deal. Probably is going to be a trade deadline candidate, but most of these players on the Sharks are probably not going to be here the next 2 seasons, with the exceptions of your Coutures, your Hertls, your Vlasic, who's going to be there until the sun explodes. And then you're going to start to see the young players start to kind of filter in. So kind of like you look at the Kings a couple years ago, right? They kept some of the big stalwarts around to kind of show the young guys. Sharks are kind of doing the same thing right now too.
Well, let's hope that sun doesn't explode anytime soon. The NHL draft is obviously very important to every team, but in particular, a team like the Sharks as they rebuild the team. I noticed that the Locked On Sharks Twitter account has changed the headline to Locked On Fresh Prince. I wonder if that's in reference to, I don't know, the first-round pick of the Sharks this year, whose name is Will Smith. Tell us about that pick and what is the young crop of talent looking like for the Sharks?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike Grier knocked it out of the park with this draft. Picking Will Smith at number 4. There's always going to be, at least with Sharks Twitter, the debate of Michkov for Smith at number 4, and we will see what happens with Michkov as he, develops for the Flyers. But Will Smith, I think in most drafts, would probably be a 2nd overall pick. Uber talented offensively. Just whenever he steps on the ice, he can make some of the most ridiculous plays in the offensive zone. And he's going to go play college this year in Boston. It'll be interesting to see if the Sharks are one and done with him, as we kind of start to see that with a lot of college prospects, or if he does the 2 years. I think for him, it's going to be developing that full 200-foot game. He's never going to be a Selke kind of candidate, but you don't draft guys like Will Smith to play shutdown defense. You draft them to go score 90 to 100 points for you. And I think Will Smith has a chance to be one of those type of players. Quentin Musty, who they drafted 26th overall with the Devils pick. He was a guy that a lot of public scouts had as a top 15 guy, but slid down to the Sharks. There was some issues with consistency. Last year in the OHL, he dealt with mono for the first half of the season, and it took a little bit for him to come back, but it was a monster to kind of end the season. And big bodied, 6'2", 200 pounds, already just turned 18, can shoot, is very creative as well. And you're just seeing this size and skill that the Sharks are going to add to their forward department to go with a lot of depth pieces that they've already drafted in the 2020 and the 2021 draft. But I think guys like Musty and Smith are going to be top line players for the Sharks in the years to come.
Well, some of our listeners and viewers have pointed out that even though we've had some great guests in the past, that sometimes maybe they're a little too Kings friendly with their opinions. Well, up next, we will get a rival's opinion on our LA Kings. That is next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. But first, I want to remind you this episode of Locked On LA Kings is brought to you by Birddogs. What are Birddogs, you ask? Well, they are shorts that have the underwear built in them. And you might say, what? That's weird. Why would I want that? Well, my answer is yes, Birddogs are weird, but they are awesomely weird because is it weird that something could look good and feel good at the same time? Maybe. But it's the perfect combination. You can wear these Birddog shorts and pants out to a nice casual dinner. You could also work out in them because they're that comfortable. Point is, you look good. You'll feel good, and that's what Birddogs is all about. Once you try them, you're going to wonder why you never heard of these before. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. Enter the promo code LockedOnNHL. You get a free tech hat, a white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com, BARDDOGS.com. LockedOnNHL. Enter the promo code LockedOnNHL for your free white tech hat. You won't want to take off your Birddogs. We promise. All right, we got more with JD Young, the fantastic host of Locked On San Jose Sharks. We're going to get his opinions on the LA Kings in a moment, but to butter him up a little bit, we had a vote of the Locked On hosts for the NHL shows about some top 5 things, and we had the top 5 mascots, and I'll have you know, I voted SJ Sharkey #1 mascot in the NHL. So there's that, right?
I know when our fearless leader Sean set those out, there was 0 Sharks at any of the rankings at all.
Kings too.
Yeah. Really, no King? That's surprising too.
No.
Huh. Interesting, because the Kings, we will get to. I think the Kings are going to be very good this year. But I mean, I know the Sharks are really bad, but yeah, SJ Sharkey, he's amazing, and yeah, I mean, other than Gritty, I think he's the best mascot in the entire NHL. But this is just one man's opinion, or two men's opinion right here, as we both love SJ Sharkey. So yes.
Well, let's get your opinion on our LA Kings, and I know you're going to be very honest about it, and you should be. Yeah. But let's start off with a Sharks Kings connection. Todd McLellen was a very successful head coach for the Sharks for many years. He is now going into the season as we speak without a contract extension. He's in the final year of his contract. It looks like it's a make or break year for him as far as getting an extension or not. They've gone to the playoffs 2 years in a row, haven't made it out of the first round. When he was with San Jose, a lot of success, but never got to a Stanley Cup final, obviously never won it. So let me ask you about Todd McLellen. What do you think of him as a head coach? Do you think that he is a guy that can get a team all the way to the Stanley Cup final?
I think so. I like McLellan. I liked his system that he brought when he was hired. Remember, he used to be a Detroit assistant. And you saw the Sharks really turned on their offense as soon as McLellan arrived. And I think he's done a good job overall with the Kings, especially as they've started to infiltrate some of these young players. But I think there's some roster issues that we'll get to here in a minute. But I think McLellan's a good enough coach where he can I think he can win a Stanley Cup, and there's a reason why he keeps getting hired, as he's kind of done his tour of the Pacific here. But I think he's above average to a top 10 coach in the league. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised he doesn't have a contract here, but I mean, you know how the NHL is. It's, you gotta, what have you done for me lately? And I think for the Kings, getting past the first round is a huge priority for them, right?
No doubt. We talked about the Erik Karlsson trade. I thought that was the biggest trade this offseason. I thought the second biggest trade was made by the LA Kings when they shipped out 3 players off their NHL roster and a draft pick to the Winnipeg Jets to get center Pierre-Luc Dubois. As a Sharks fan, how do you feel about this trade? And do you see this deal helping the Kings be better than they have been the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, as a Sharks fans, I hate it because now the Kings are even better. And you look at the Kings' depth, especially down the center, right? You've got Kopitar, you've got Pierre-Luc Dubois. You can kind of interchange as who you want to be 1 and 2. You have Phil. Denault, who's like an amazing 3C. And that doesn't even account for Quentin Byfield, who I know the Kings have been very, very slow with his development, but the dude's still going to be a monster at some point, right? You're just waiting for everything to click. Like, they say you win down the center, and I mean, it's hard to rival what the Kings have at all 3 levels. I would say, you look at Edmonton, right? McDavid, of course, the best player in the league. Draisaitl's number 2, but then like who's number 3, right? Anaheim, they're putting their center group together here soon, but I still think they're a couple years away. I think they have 1 through 3, the best 3 centers. I think in the entire Pacific. And that's when you get to the playoffs, you need all 3 of those lines clicking. So
I realize that you are focused on the Sharks, but from afar, is there anything about the Kings that kind of jumps out to you as far as something you really like about them? Maybe you just mentioned it, or is there something that you look at and you're like, oh man, I'm not sure about that part of that team?
I mean, I like what the Kings have done, especially down the center. I love Brant Clark. He was one of my favorite players in that year's draft. If the Sharks didn't pick Eklund, I was very pick Brant Clark because he's going to be amazing. I just talked to his former teammate, Ethan Cardwell, who they both played together with the Barrie Colts. He couldn't stop gushing about Brant Clark. And I think Brant Clark is going to be an absolute monster for the Kings. The thing that worries me, and I'm sure you have probably talked about it as well, is the goaltending. It is a huge question mark. I know Cam Talbot has been, good at times, but he's 36. Phoenix Copley, who came out of nowhere last year, I don't know if I trust that goaltending tandem, and I would not be surprised if the Kings are very aggressive at the deadline to try to acquire somebody for the cup run. I just don't know if you can run into the playoffs, especially if you're going to be having to play either McDavid, Eichel, Stone, whoever you're playing, in the first round. You need somebody better than Cam Talbot and Phoenix Copley going into the playoffs. So that's what I think, at least. But what do I know? I haven't seen a good goaltender in 8 years. So.
Well, I'm going to ask you about a former Sharks goalie in a second, but I think I know the answer to this question. Do you think the Kings are a playoff team? Let me ask you if the answer is yes, what you think it is. 2 straight first-round exits to the Oilers. Do you see them finally getting out of the first round this season?
I do think they're a playoff team. I think it's going to come down to seeding, to be honest, but Vegas is interesting because, well, I'm sure we'll talk about the Pacific here a little bit more, but everything kind of came together for them last year, and that's kind of Vegas's MO, is things just kind of coming together for them. I'm not trying to hate on you guys, Vegas, but just a little bit. But I think it's going to come down to seeding a lot. But I think they have the talent, they have the depth, right? I don't know if maybe they have the star power to go up against the Eichels and the McDavids in the world, which I think is the difference makers when it comes, especially comes to playoff time. But I think if they can upgrade the goalie situation, I think they can be. I mean, look at the Kraken last year, right? Not really no star talent, but they were just solid all 4 lines. And I think the Kings could just be a better version of that. And maybe you can take down, you just let your McDavids and your Draisaitl's go crazy, and you try to win the other 3 matchups and just contain those guys as best you can. So, but yeah, I think if they don't upgrade the goalie, I think it's going to be another first round exit for them.
All right, we're going to have more with Locked On Sharks host JD Young and get his thoughts on the Pacific Division. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. This episode of Locked On LA Kings brought to you by AG1, the daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports your whole body health. With 1 delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. AG1 contains less than 1 gram of sugar, costs you less than $3 a day, and it's just 1 scoop in a cup of water. That's it. No need for a million different pills or supplements to look out for your health. If a comprehensive solution to what you need from your supplement routine is what you're looking for, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Just go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out. All right, we are wrapping it up with the host of Locked On Sharks. That is JD Young. Got a couple more minutes with him. So, JD, if you would have told me, right, before last season, Jonathan Quick would be on the Stanley Cup winning Vegas Golden Knights, I'm not sure what my reaction would have been. What would your reaction have been if I would have told you that Adin Hill would be backstopping the Vegas Golden Knights to a Stanley Cup title?
I don't know, man. That's so Sharks, right? That is so Sharks to have a goalie they had in-house get traded away, and then, of course, leads one of your biggest rivals to a Stanley Cup before you even get close to sniffing a Stanley Cup. But, I mean, good for Adin Hill, man. If you go back in time, coming out of that season, Adin Hill was the third man on the Sharks goalie depth chart behind Reimer and Kaapo Kähkönen. Was either hurt, he's missed the majority of the season when he was with San Jose, or he was just playing bad the other times. You know, he played one game from mid-January to the end of the season, and the one game he came in, which hilariously he shut out the Kings 3-0, which I still think came in, played one game, and then we never saw him again. So at the time of the trade, like, it made sense. You got an asset for Adin Hill, and you sent him to Vegas, and it's not like he was walked in and became Vegas' starter from day one. He kind of just hung around until the other guys died and worked his way up. And dude played out of his mind. I'll give him all the credit in the world. Dude played out of his mind in the playoffs. Happy for him. Go get your money. But it's just so Sharks.
Now, before last season, there was a lot of talk about the Pacific Division being the worst division in hockey. Well, lo and behold, the Pacific had 4 teams make the playoffs, and 3 of the 4 teams advanced out of the first round. Of course, one of them couldn't because they went head-to-head, and unfortunately, that was my Kings. But the Stanley Cup winner comes from the Pacific as well. What do you think about this season? Was that just a one-year thing, or do you think the Pacific is showing itself to be one of the better divisions? Do they get 4 teams in this year? Do they get 5 teams in this year in the playoffs?
I think they have a chance to get 5. I comfortably can say 4, but I think they do have a chance to get 5 teams in the playoffs, especially if you look at the Central, right? I mean, you kind of have, pulling up the old standings, right? The Avalanche are going to be good. The Stars are probably going to be really good. I think the Wild are going to be good, but then it's just kind of this middle meh of the Central between the Jets, the Predators, and the Blues. And I know there's some talk out of Arizona. Maybe this is the year they kind of start to make a move. And I know the Blackhawks undeservingly got Connor Bedard, but that team still is a mess right now. But I mean, you look in the Pacific, I think there's a chance. I think the middle of the Pacific is stronger than the middle of the Central. And I think there's, again, Oilers and Knights, I put those guys at the top of the Pacific, but I think the Kings have us really strong. They could be in that top tier. The Kraken made a big jump last year. The Canucks, for some reason, I can't quit the Canucks because I think they have so many talented pieces. I know the whole organization is a mess, but when you have Pettersson and you have Quinn Hughes and you've got a good goalie, at some point they got to put together, right? Like, I think there is a chance for the Pacific to put 5 teams in the playoffs this year. And if the Flames make a bounce back with, I think, just a fresh start at coach, they still have some talented pieces as well. So I think there's a really good chance for the Pacific to actually put 5 teams in from the West.
Now, we know there are always going to be surprises. I mean, you mentioned Seattle last year. That was certainly a huge surprise. Is there any scenario you see the Sharks shocking the world and contending for a playoff spot this year?
No. I'll give you the crazy man roadmap. It has to be Mackenzie Blackwood just going like top 10 goalie. Mackenzie Blackwood goes top 10 goalie. Logan Couture turns back the clock. Tomas Hertl has a rebound season. William Eklund comes in and he's like a 60, 70 point player. Anthony Duclair is a 30 goal scorer, kind of fills that role of the Timo Meier. You have Mikael Granlund, who refines his form of being a former 80 point player. The defense, there is not one puck moving defenseman on this roster right now. I think they're going to end up playing a lot of time in their own zone. But the goaltending is, it's a lot of question marks on this team, and I think the forward group is solidish. Like, you can kind of squint and be like, okay, I can see it there, but once you get to the blue line on back, it's just a mess back there. And I don't see, unless Mackenzie Blackwood just stands on his head for 6 straight months, I don't see the Sharks just being competitive at all this year.
Well, that is JD Young, and regardless of the Shark season, he does it as well as anybody on the network here on Locked On. Appreciate you, JD. You can follow him on Twitter at MyFryhole or at Locked On Sharks. Of course, you can find Locked On Sharks in the same places you find Locked On LA Kings on YouTube as well. It's always a pleasure, JD. Really appreciate your time and continued success with Locked On Sharks.
Thanks, Eddie. We'll talk again soon, buddy.
All right. Take care. All right, that was our first interview of one of our rivals in the Pacific Division. We hope to be doing one of these every week going forward as we count down to the 2023-24 NHL season. Also, you might have caught it yesterday. John Chick of Locked On New York Rangers invited me on to talk about Jonathan Quick and some other things involving the Kings and the Rangers. If you want to check that out, it's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as well. And for you everydayers, you know that we've got a show coming up on Friday, our weekly fan feedback show, all your questions and comments on everything going on with the LA Kings or anything we've talked about this week. The email address, if you want to send an email as a comment, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And as always, you can leave your comments on the YouTube episodes as well. We'd love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you on Friday. And as always, go Kings go.